Nottinghamshire recycles. Veolia, working with Nottinghamshire County Council. In Nottinghamshire, we encourage everyone to reduce, reuse and recycle as much as possible, so we don't waste precious resources. Let's see what happens to all the recyclables you put in your recycling bin. When your borough or district collection crew collect the recyclables from your home, they either take them directly to the material recovery facility or via a local transfer station, where they are bulked into an articulated lorry which collects them, and they are taken to our materials recovery facility in Mansfield. First, it's weighed in on the weighbridge, so there's an accurate record of its tonnage. All the recyclable materials are then unloaded into the tipping hall, where they are loaded onto the conveyor belts into the pre-sort cabin. This is where larger items like cardboard boxes are picked out to make sure they don't cover up any other recyclables. The large cardboard boxes are still recycled. The next stop is the trommel, where the waste passes through different sized holes in its rotating drum to separate out containers from the paper. Paper goes straight down to the paper cabins. All the other recyclable items
you there. Okay, good morning, everybody, and welcome to this morning's Transport and Environment Committee. Welcome to anybody watching on live stream as well. I'm Councillor Neil Clark, I'm Chairman of the committee, and I'm joined by members of the Council and officers supporting the committee. So, item 1, minutes of the last meeting. Can I assign those as a true and correct record, please? Anybody propose that? Seconded. All in favour? Thank you. Item 2, apologies for absence, please.
Yes, Chairman. We have apologies from Councillor Nigel Turner for medical reasons, and Councillor Barnfather is substituting for him, and also apologies from Maureen Dobson, who's given other reasons, and there is no substitute for Maureen. There literally is no substitute for Maureen.
well, we know that. Yeah. Okay. Right. Thanks for that. I'm sure she would. Yes. Okay. Right. So, item 3, declarations of interest by members and officers. Does anybody have any disclosable pecuniary interests? No. Does anybody have any private interests, either pecuniary or non-pecuniary? Nope. Okay, thank you very much indeed. So we'll move straight on to the substantive items. So item 4, which is the natural environment and woodland creation. And could I ask Heather Stokes, you're the conservation team manager?
If I may just introduce this
right,
item.
Gill, yep.
Councillor Clark, I'm Sally Gill, Group Manager Planning, and the purpose of this report and Heather and Nick's presentation is to introduce the work that the conservation team does in terms of the natural environment. So it covers ecology, biodiversity, management of the County Council's green spaces and the Greenwood community forest. And an important part of all of that is working with volunteers. So we've got a short presentation for you, and then Heather and Nick will be very pleased to answer any questions members may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Nick's going to attempt to operate the presentation, and he's also going to answer any technical questions, should there be any. I haven't told him that bit. So I thought I would start the presentation by setting the scene for the work that we do. The information that's on the screen at the moment is very recent. Most of it comes from the Environmental Audit Committee report that was published on the 30th of June this year. And according to research conducted by the Natural History Museum, the UK has only 50.3% of its natural biodiversity left. That puts us in the bottom 10% of countries globally, and last among the G7 countries. And there are some fairly stark figures there. I think the one that struck me most was actually from evidence to the committee from Wildlife and Countryside Link at the bottom there that says that building on greenfield sites since 1990 has resulted in a net reduction in grassland greater than the size of Suffolk and Sussex combined. So we are starting from a very low point. Next slide. Just to put this in a Nottinghamshire context, we have a very low level of statutory sites in the county compared to the national average, only 1.5% coverage. About 15% covered by local biodiversity action plan habitats, but much of that is not in great condition. And we have some habitats that are very scarce indeed. So the figure there for heathland and acid grassland, which was the bulk of the Sherwood Historic Forest, is down from 24,000 hectares to about 1,300. And we've also seen local declines in many species. So the little bird at the bottom there is a willow tit, which has seen declines in this county as well as nationally. Next slide. What's driving the change? Climate change is one, but actually agriculture. 69% of our land is managed for agriculture. So changes in agricultural management have had the biggest single impact on nature in recent decades. The impact on climate change is increasing. That 48% of the decline in moth species is quite stark. Other key drivers illustrated in the pictures below are urbanisation, changes in hydrology, invasive non-native species. The picture second from right is actually floating pennywort, and that was a watercourse. It's now completely greened over. And unsustainable woodland management. Slide. Who we are a team of natural and historic environment specialists. I'm focusing entirely on the natural environment side of the work we do. Our primary role is to provide specialist advice for the Council's plans and programmes, and that's underpinned by a range of legislation, some of which is on its way. The Environment Bill at the bottom there is working its way through Parliament at the moment, and that builds on the 25-year Environment Plan. There's also a whole raft of legislation underpinning the historic environment work, some of which is quite arcane, but not referenced here. We also do a lot of other things. We provide advice to communities, work with partners, delivering programmes. We manage the County Council's green spaces, as Sally referenced, support and develop the county's heritage tourism offer, some of which is natural environment based. We act as lead partner for landscape scale programmes. Often we are the only partner who is big enough to actually act as the lead and accountable body because of the amount of money that comes through for some of these schemes. We host Greenwood Community Forest and the Nottinghamshire Biodiversity Partnership, and have done for many years. And we also develop opportunities for training and volunteering, which I will also pick up on further on in the presentation. Thanks, Nick. So ecology, this is Nick. He's a county ecologist. A lot of what he does is providing specialist planning advice. The pictures you've got there show at the bottom restoration of a mineral site to biodiversity. That's Langford Lowfields, which is now managed by the RSPB. And work such as that has helped to increase some quite rare species in the county. I believe we've had bitters booming in some of the reed beds that have been created. I know the RSPB have seen avocet coming back to the site. So proactive work to restore to biodiversity after minerals use is showing an increase in some of the species that we had lost. We also support other sections of the authority. The top picture there is a notified road verge, and we've been working with colleagues in highways on expanding wildflower road verges across the county. State of nature reporting, Nick led on producing a State of Nature in Sherwood report a few years ago. And we also have an emerging role in leading on biodiversity net gain and the local nature recovery strategies that will be coming through the Environment Bill. Next, please, Nick. Biodiversity. Biodiversity Action Group formed in 1995. We were one of the original founding partners as a county council. Now nearly 50 partners working across the county. The collective effort for biodiversity that those partners undertake is enormous. Much of it is voluntary. And they undertake volunteer action to help address invasive non-native species. And most recently, they've been doing work on biodiversity opportunity mapping as a partnership, which I will also come on to shortly. So we work with partners to conserve both nationally and locally important species. The top picture is one of white-clawed crayfish, and one of our green spaces sites supports one of the best populations of this in the county. We've been working with volunteers also to undertake control work to try and halt the spread of the invasive non-native American signal crayfish. which is spreading throughout watercourses across the country and carries a plague, I believe, that is detrimental to our native species. The second picture is of water vole. Populations of this have declined through both habitat loss and predation by mink, which were released. And we've been working on a catchment scale with partners like the Trent Rivers Trust to improve habitats for creatures like water vole. These are two spectacularly brown butterflies, and members who've seen me give presentations before will probably recognise this one. Thanks, Derek. So on the left is the dingy skipper, which uses various of our pit tips and disused railway sites. And on the right is a photo of the grizzled skipper, which is a nationally scarce butterfly and currently the fastest declining butterfly in the UK. And we find these on some of our green spaces sites. We've been working with partners to help restore habitats for these. So we are seeing some increases locally where work's been carried out. But apart from butterflies, we have very little information about invertebrates on our green spaces sites and nothing at all on things like bryophytes and lichens. So there's a bit of a data gap there. Oops, I'm now going backwards. Apologies. That's better. Dealing with invasive non-native species. Nationally, the estimated cost of damage to the economy of non-native species, invasive non-native species, is 1.8 billion per annum. There are already around 2,000 non-native species established in the country, and about 12% of those cause serious damage. We work with volunteers on a lot of this. The top left is Japanese knotweed. That requires specialist intervention. We had it at 21 locations on green spaces sites. It's now down to 9 locations, and we continue to work to eradicate it. Chris Jackson, who is the biodiversity officer, is working with over 400 volunteers to control invasive non-native species such as Himalayan balsam and signal crayfish. I understand that they've removed about 25,000 signal crayfish from the River Leen catchment, and they've been controlling Himalayan balsam mostly by hand pulling it with volunteers along about 20 kilometres of river channel. Biodiversity opportunity mapping is something that we've been undertaking quite recently. This is part of the drive towards ensuring that our biodiversity is better, bigger, more of it, and more connected. On the left there is the original biodiversity opportunity mapping showing the extent of heathland habitats around Sherwood, and on the right is where it will be, or currently. The restoration work's being carried out. Once that heathland is properly established, that's where it will be. So it helps to guide where we put our effort to make sure that we get the most benefit from it. We've almost completed, possibly have now completed, biodiversity opportunity mapping for the entire county, working with a partnership of organisations and specialists. It puts us a step ahead for things like local nature recovery strategies. Greenwood Community Forest is another partnership that we've been supporting. It's been established for 30 years now, one of 12 community forests across England. And as it says there, first tree was planted in 1991. We've now worked with partners to plant over 2 million of them. A recent project was Trees for Learning, where we worked with 50 primary schools to plant over 5,000 trees on school sites, and a huge volunteer effort that's supported through the Friends of Greenwood. One of the projects that has come to us through Greenwood and our membership of England's community forests is Trees for Climate. This is part of government's Nature for Climate funding, so part of the 640 million that was set aside, approximately 500 million of that is for tree planting. And Greenwood Community Forest will create 250 hectares of new woodland in Nottinghamshire by 2025. That's part of an overall programme of 6,000 hectares, of which I believe the bulk is going into the Northern Forest. So some big tree planting programmes across the north of England. But we've committed to 250 hectares. This will contribute significantly towards our own targets in the environment policy of planting 250,000 trees. In fact, it will exceed that if we manage to get all the trees in the ground. We're looking at delivering on the NCC land, other local authority land, and also on privately owned and third sector sites as well. So we've had year one. Year one started a little late for reasons that probably best not to dwell on, but weren't of our making. So we managed to get 4.9 hectares of woodland planting in the ground at Bentinck, which is one of our green spaces sites. It's a bit difficult to see, but there are actually 4,400 trees on that green bit in the middle. At the moment, they're quite small. Year two, which is the next slide onwards, we're planning to plant about 60 hectares this year on the sites listed at the top. Vickerwater is a site that's being planted by colleagues in Newark and Sherwood, working with Sherwood Forest Trust. The top three are all county council sites. I'm not sure about the bottom one. Is that?
Parish council.
That's a parish council site, thank you. We are facing some interesting challenges. The push to plant more trees is resulting in a shortage of foresters, as we have discovered when we tried to recruit them. Land availability is also a challenge because there are other uses, other pressures on that land, and just procuring the number of trees that we require is proving to be interesting. Finding planting contractors is also proving challenging because they are all working to plant trees across the country. The other opportunity that we're currently pursuing is actually looking at buying a piece of land using DEFRA funding that would be entirely for tree planting. Thanks, Nick. So our green spaces also make a contribution to biodiversity. We've got around 75 sites covering about 1,250 hectares that are managed for wildlife and people. Some of those are quite special. We've got 5 sites of special scientific interest and 57 kilometres of trails and multi-user routes. It is a challenge to manage that large number of sites, and we are very aware that many of those sites could be better for biodiversity, but that requires us to find additional funding. We have in the past brought in stewardship money for some of those, and hopefully there'll be opportunities under the new land management schemes as well. Thanks, Nick. Just to highlight the importance of our green spaces sites, we have 13 local biodiversity action plan priority habitats found on our sites. Top one there is a grassland site. I think that's the Limby Trail. And woodland, we've also got small amounts of reed bed, and some of those very rare calcareous grasslands are found on our green spaces sites. They all require specialist management. As I'm not actually on the right page here on my screen, I'm now going to try and remember what these species are. The one on the right is a bee orchid, which I believe is found on at least one of our green spaces sites. Fairly widespread. In the middle, just common harebell in a grassland site. And on the left is greenwing. No.
Frog orchid. One of the less spectacular orchids, but very rare.
Yes, but found on green spaces site. So highlights the importance of county's green spaces. They also provide corridors for wildlife. That's roe deer, and on the bottom right is carder bee, so pollinator species using our green spaces sites. And we do an enormous amount of work with volunteers. We could do more, but actually it requires capacity in order to support those volunteers. we don't just let them loose on our green spaces sites with a bow saw. So they do have support from a member of staff. I think if I can find the right page, I actually have some figures on the amount of volunteer effort. So the figures that we have from 2019, which was the last full year of volunteering out on site before we were shut down, was we had 5,704 hours of volunteer effort, which if you paid people the living wage for doing that, it would cost us 50,000, just over. So £50,000 worth of effort from volunteers to help us manage our green spaces sites. It's a phenomenal amount of effort. And when you combine that with the volunteer effort that goes into other organisations, such as Wildlife Trust, RSPB, it's a huge amount of effort that people put in on behalf of biodiversity in this county. Next. This slide takes some of the biodiversity opportunity mapping. I've just used this to highlight the importance of our green spaces for habitat connectivity. So it's picked out 4 of our green spaces sites, and as you can see, they're part of a continuum. So without the management of those sites, those habitats would be more isolated. So hugely important in terms of making sure that biodiversity can respond to changes. Thanks, Nick. We also support some other major programmes. Minor to Major is currently halfway through. It's hard to believe because a year and a half of it has been in lockdown. And for a project that was entirely based on community engagement, that's been quite challenging. We're the lead partner and accountable body for this. It took a huge amount of effort to get it because it's a big partnership. There's a very strong focus on skills and training as part of this and engaging people with the historic forest. The key programmes within that are natural environment related are Better Habitats, Saving Sherwood's Special Species, Sherwood's Landscape of Trees and Hedges, which is about engaging people with surveying hedges to understand what we've got and enthusing people about planting trees, and Learning and Engagement. We're working with Inspire on this element of the programme, and they've done a phenomenal job in very difficult circumstances in ensuring that people have been able to gain skills, take part. And hopefully at the end of this, we will have a new generation of enthusiastic people wanting to take part and understanding our biodiversity. Volunteering has been a huge success. The picture bottom right is of the young volunteers who've been working throughout the pandemic when they've been able to, and we've seen real demand from people to come out and volunteer, help us manage habitats. And through it, they've been gaining skills and experience. So they get something out of it as well. Thanks, Nick. So that's a little bit about what we do and what we have been doing. This is what's coming. So in the pipeline, we have the Environment Bill, which hopefully will be enacted shortly, and that will bring with it the National Nature Recovery Network, which will be underpinned by mandatory local nature recovery strategies. And the anticipation is that those will be produced at county level. So that will be heading in our direction. We've already started talking to partners about, and to Natural England, who have the lead on this, about how we can take that forward. We are keeping everything crossed that it will bring some extra resources because capacity is going to be an issue. Certainly the pilots that have been running have demonstrated that extra resources are required in order to make this happen. Biodiversity net gain is also on its way, and I understand that that is now going to be extended to national infrastructure projects. And the last one on that list is 30 by 30, which is this idea that we protect 30% of the UK's land by 2030. One note of caution with that is that we do seem to be there seems to be a misapprehension that actually protecting land using landscape designations such as national parks and AONBs will have a positive impact on biodiversity. I grew up in a national park and I can tell you that is not the case. They are landscape designations. They don't necessarily bring enhancements for biodiversity unless we actually actively seek to do so. It will be very interesting to see how that one pans out. Is that the last slide, Nick? So I think, in summary, we are doing a lot. We're doing an awful lot with a lot of partners and a lot of people. It's not enough. If we are going to crack the biodiversity emergency that we are facing, we need to do more. And I think we also need to ensure that the work we are doing to address the climate emergency doesn't inadvertently have negative impacts on biodiversity. We have seen some examples of that across the country. And I think it's something that we need to bear in mind as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. On that very last point, yes, it is sometimes can be quite a difficult balancing act, can't it? The consequences of doing one thing to achieve something good has a different consequence. But thank you very much indeed for that. That was incredibly interesting. And not just biodiverse, but it was a very diverse report, so very comprehensive. So thank you very much indeed for that. I will formally move the recommendations at the bottom of page 8, that we welcome the information contained in the presentation and that we're reaffirm our support for the Biodiversity Action Group. Can I have a seconder, please?
Yeah, formally seconded. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Do you want to say anything now?
Yeah, I'll dive in now if that's okay. Just thanks so much for that presentation. Yeah, I thought it was really in depth and it's great to get a better understanding overall about, about what we've sort of in the initial discussion we've been talking about climate change. We've been talking about our current point, our current status, and I think understanding that in terms of biodiversity is really important to how we move forward. Some of those figures around our loss of habitat are quite daunting. I think it was did you say 73,000 down to 1,300 or something like that? I mean, I literally can't quantify that in my own head. It seems extreme. And so I also simultaneously understand what you're saying about how we've got to not just leave land effectively, but go in and physically restore it back to its original status as well. So that's yeah. That sort of really rang true with me. And just moving quickly onto the tree planting, I think it's a phenomenal programme. 31,000 trees for Bestwood Country Park. I mean, we recognise that trees are the most natural sink we've got to the carbon, looking at the climate change issue. With sort of 6 trees getting rid of sort of around about a ton of carbon. Some estimate between 100 years growth of one tree can deal with a ton of carbon, but they are the most naturally and nice to look at things as well you can possibly put in place to deal with the carbon challenges that we've got. There was a couple of things I wanted to ask actually, just as far as the volunteering side of things, do we have active partnerships with people like the colleges, Brackenhurst, people like that? Is there, because we talked about the lack of foresters. I'm just interested to know if obviously with that in mind, are we looking at programs around forester recruitment through the likes of Brackenhurst? And also one of the other points that you were making around about the restoring of habitats for the voles and the crayfish. I wonder where we are with the beavers. I mean, have we given them a shout? Are they on their way, or how's that going with that program as well? I don't know if you make a call directly to them or if you ring their lodge. I don't know, but where are we with that? I mean, I'd be excited to know where we are. And also, side thing, and this is something I've been thinking about for a number of years, where we have high levels of fence usage across our estates. Where would we be about replacing those potentially with hedges instead? And maybe some restorative ways that we can start to add. What I know we've lost a lot of hedging throughout the issues around farming and the increasing field sizes and that sort of thing. But where we are using estates, and if a security is an issue, you know, I mean, there's obviously all sorts of ways you can help make those hedges more secure. But I just wondered, you know, where are we with maybe thinking about along those lines as well? How can we replace those and add to that biodiversity through those routes also? Thank you.
Thank you. Helen.
I'll take some of those, and I think I might have to look to Nick for possibly some. In terms of foresters and working with local colleges, the number of colleges that or universities that actually offer forestry as a degree course are fairly restricted, and I don't believe any of the ones locally do so, which is possibly why we're having difficulties recruiting. But what we are doing with the Trees for Climate programme, we've just gone out to advert for a woodland creation assistant post, and we're offering that as an apprenticeship. So we're trying to grow our own, as they say. In terms of beaver, yes, there are plans to reintroduce beaver. The Wildlife Trust are currently looking at that at one of their major sites in Nottinghamshire. And I believe there is currently a consultation underway on whether beaver should be allowed to regenerate naturally outside of nature reserves, which is currently live, I believe. In terms of hedgerows replacing fencing, it's quite a long-term solution, and they do require management. So it will need some careful thought about where we put them, but absolutely, we can certainly get hold of hedgerow plants and look at potential opportunities, particularly where they link habitats together. I think we should be targeting.
Can I come back? Just yeah, I mean, I was just going to say, I think you're absolutely right, and I think it gives them an opportunity to surf between, you know, and specifically hedgehogs and things that, you know, like to be under around underneath in low areas of ground which you get in hedgerows, but also obviously, like you say, insect populations and things like that can jump between habitats also. Yeah, brilliant, great news about the beavers. I've been reading about that actually, the national, because they're looking at releasing them and just letting them go, I believe now is the plan. So yeah, we've got a little stream in Burton Joyce actually, which would I think would appreciate a beaver visit at some point in the future. I don't know. Anyway, that's enough from me, I think.
Careful what you wish for.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Thank you. Councillor Hollis.
Thank you, Chair. Couldn't help but have a wry smile about the dingy skipper butterfly comment when it came up, but as you know, it's the most prevalent butterfly in Ashfield. But I think things like the Himalayan balsam pull and the dingy skip butterfly do have a bit of a important meaning. So I do intend to talk more about the woodland and biodiversity, but I do want to speak about this briefly in the fact that there needs to be a better partnership. If these are the aims, and I really welcome Heather and Nick's presentation, really fantastic, but there's some serious problems, and there's some problems that we're contributing to as part of this problem, which I'll go on to. But when you talk about things like the dingy skipper butterfly, we rely on developers' reports as part of planning applications, and that then provide us the information. And we do the same thing with highways as well, Mr. Chairman, where we rely on often developer-led reports to tell us how many cars are on our roads. We rely on developer-led reports to tell us what environment they're planning on ripping up in their development sites. And call me a cynic, but I think it's like going to a insurance-sponsored doctor to tell somebody they've got whiplash. You know, they're not going to turn around and say there's loads of wildlife on that site, you need to get in there straight away and protect it. Their reports encourage the development, and they're paid for by developers. So I hope really we can have more potential investment in protecting some of our green space, particularly when it's designated as countryside belt and green belt, where actually we as a county council are prepared to dip our hands in the pockets and pay for some reports, because we're involved too. And if these are the kind of objectives we want, it's not just about doing stuff on our private land, it's about doing stuff on, as an authority, we have influence over, and we have cash in our pocket to be able to do stuff. And the reason I bring that up with the dingy skipper butterfly is we had a very controversial site in Ashfield where the dingy skipper butterfly actually stopped the development, and it made it gave the developer a real big headache. Unfortunately, they ended up getting it through, but we were able to prove that was there, and it was only through some other spurious reason that we were able to get it. But it shows you the power and importance that actually protecting the ecology, even with a government like ours now, forget the colour, they want to build, like I think most governments across Europe do at the moment, but particularly ours, even they recognise the power that protecting ecology had, balancing it with wanting to build properties. And I think Heather's team do a fantastic job with recruiting volunteers, and I would do anything to encourage more funding to manage these volunteers, because we get a lot of bang for us buck. You know, I've done volunteering for a lot of county councils across the country. One of my favourite experiences when I did a bit of work with Kent County Council and Kent Wildlife Trust. I remember speaking to Sally about this, where they were felling a number of trees that were obviously planted closely together, and they were getting rid of the weaker ones, and then they were making them into benches and all sorts of stuff for this park. They do a fantastic job, but particularly in Ashfield, they pull all the Himalayan balsam around Kingsmill Res, where of course the county council and the local councils invested heavily in making that into a nature walk, but we wouldn't have been able to do it without those volunteers, and things like using the lake for sailing, pedlos, or even walking around the lake. You wouldn't have been able to do that without clearing the way. My bigger concern about this, and I think Heather kind of touched on it when she was talking about some of the landscaped open spaces, is tree planting is causing the problem with biodiversity. I think key listeners to Radio 4 this morning would have heard there was a bit of a piece on there about it, whereby we are planting more trees, but we're planting the same number of trees, so the same type and breed. And to use an example, the oak tree provides moss and fungus, which directly contributes to the breeding of 40 other types of trees. Without the oak tree, those other trees won't be able to reproduce, particularly with the same quantity. So when we're planting trees, I really would encourage Heather to include not only the number of trees we're planting, but actually the different types of tree, which is, I'd arguably say, more important. And I think it's about having the objective to what we're trying to achieve. Is the objective, as Councillor Adams alluded to, as a primary focus for climate change, or has it got a multi-use? Is it about including the biodiversity as well? So my point is Ashfield Council, we've set ourselves a target to plant 1,000 trees before the end of the term. We're well on track, and we've worked with the County Council and the Greenwood Trust, for that matter, on sites like Briley Park, Sutton Lawn. We had an objective that wasn't just about numbers, but diversity. So, for example, we planted a lot of fruit trees. The objective there was to get kids in from the schools to plant them. They can then come and collect the fruit. It was about the wider circular education of tree planting. I think we need to have a more strategic on-look about saying, well, what are the insects, what are the species we want to protect, and plant trees, hedgerows, whatever it might be, to encourage those to flourish. So I do think tree planting is a red herring and is a potential problem. So I would ask us to look at that in the context of what I've said. I'd definitely like to know more about this biodiversity mapping, particularly bearing in mind places like Ashfield are probably some of the more urban centres of the county. And I only can think about how important it is in our district, so it must be tenfold in other districts. So I'd certainly be keen to see that. And I think that really is the end of my comments, other than to pick up on something that Councillor Adams said with things like the badger and other things. Like tree planting, it isn't the answer just to release one type of species, because then that will have a knock-on effect on what else is going on within the biodiversity. So the last thing I want to do is think let's just focus on badgers or whatever it might be, because we know the problem that causes in agriculture as well. And we do have to sit harmoniously with our neighbours who frankly fund a lot of these things. And I don't think creating a lot of angry farmers is potentially the answer to increase biodiversity. We want to be working with these people. So that's kind of the encouragement I'd have: tree planting and strategic animal release. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I don't know, Heather, do you have any responses to, without going through not everything, just specific questions?
I was going to ask Nick if he wanted to respond to the issue about trees, the tree planting, because he's been heavily involved with that.
Yeah, fine. Nick?
Thank you. So, yeah, the woodlands we're designing are definitely multifunctional. The funding is tied to carbon reduction. That's the driver for the funding, but our woodlands are definitely designed to be multifunctional, so to benefit wildlife, public access, flood mitigation as well, where appropriate. So yeah, woodlands 100% are multifunctional, not just designed to be, you know, fast growing trees to lock up carbon. We also want to design those woodlands to be diverse and to be resilient to the impacts of climate change, because, you know, we've seen what happens with ash dieback. It, you know, rips through and you know, can decimate a species in a few short years. So our woodlands, again, are definitely designed with a range of species included in them, so that, you know, if one does succumb to a new, you know, pest or disease, then, you know, there are other species there to effectively take their place. And what we're generally doing is using native and locally appropriate species, which are, you know, reflective and characteristic of the local landscape. But in some cases, we might look to diversify the mix that we're using with potentially conifers or other other species. Again, it depends what the purpose of the woodland is. So it may be that in some cases we're designing woodland which is more focused on timber production, in which case we might bring in some other species. So yeah, it's definitely not a one size fits all, and we definitely take on board those points that you made. I think the other important thing to note is that there's been a bit of controversy recently about new woodlands being planted on peat bogs, which is generally a no-no. Or it should be a no-no. So, you know, what we want to make sure is that we're not planting on sites which have existing ecological value, as, for example, you know, species-rich grasslands, for example. We definitely wouldn't want to plant those with trees. So we make sure that we go out and survey sites that, you know, to determine that they are appropriate for planting before we get too far down the line. So yeah, hopefully that answers some of your questions on woodlands. The beavers issue is an interesting one. Beavers are a landscape engineer, and I appreciate that they're perhaps not everyone's cup of tea. They do, in some cases, cause damage to farmers' crops. They might cause localized flooding, but by holding back water, they can attenuate downstream flood flows. They can improve water quality. They provide habitat for fish and frogs to breed in. But I agree, you know, these sorts of introductions do need to be carefully thought through. And as Councillor Adams alluded to, there is a consultation currently happening about the release of beavers into the wider countryside, not just in enclosures. And if anyone is interested, the Wildlife Trust are imminently going to be releasing some beavers into an enclosure at their Idle Valley Nature Reserve. I believe the fencing has recently gone in for that, and they are sourcing some beavers from Scotland to release into their new homes. So yes, exciting.
Thank you for that, and actually that's, well, you partially answered one of the questions I was going to ask later, but it's relevant now. And that is the problem, is that whilst it's great to reintroduce beavers, does it have other unintended consequences? You talked about it helps maybe mitigate the downstream flooding, but how will it impact possibly on our flood risk management upstream and create other flooding problems that didn't exist prior to maybe a beaver's dam being constructed? So it's again that balancing act, getting the balance right between encouraging wildlife, which is very much to be welcomed, against additional flood risk. So are you basically working and liaising with the flood risk team to ensure that the consequences are taken into account?
So the beavers that the Wildlife Trust are releasing are going into an enclosure, so they're in a very tightly controlled environment. They're not on a river. They're on a area of former gravel works. So they are in a closely controlled environment. I think it remains to, well, we don't yet know, I suppose, you know, when we're going to be dealing with beavers in Nottinghamshire and the wider countryside. But yes, I think no doubt there will have to be conversations with colleagues in flood risk. I have no doubt that there will be a licensing process in place to deal with problematic beavers. You know, where they've built a dam across a watercourse and causing localised flooding, then I'm sure there will be measures in place to either remove those dams or to, I believe, put in place what are called beaver deceivers to allow the water to continue to flow through the dam, no matter how high they build it. So there are various mitigation options.
Thank you. The other question I wanted to ask, which again is related to planting of the trees. It's great to have these ambitions, whatever it might be, plant 1,000 trees, plant 50,000 trees, whatever. So that's planting trees. But what I'm also interested in is the survival of those trees planted, because my understanding is there's a very high failure rate of newly planted trees, something like 25% or something. So what can we do to mitigate and reduce that level of failure?
So when we design a planting scheme, we do account for the fact that a proportion of trees will fail in the first couple of years. So we go through a process that's called beating up, where we go back in the first and second year after planting and replace those failures to ensure that a woodland is fully stocked. But actually, those trees are planted at quite a high density. We're talking maybe about 2 metre centres, so every tree is 2 metres away from another tree, which if you think about mature woodland is very, very dense. So actually we go back in sort of 15 or 20 years time and we thin the woodland out, restructure it. So actually those trees, they need more space to grow, and they lock up more carbon when they're grown in a sort of more open environment. So we do need to manage trees. We got a bit lucky with our Bentick South planting, where if you remember it was extremely dry in the spring, and I think we were very worried that all the trees we just planted were going to succumb to drought, but actually most of them have survived. And as I say, those which have failed will be going back next planting season to replace.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Guilford.
Thank you, Chairman. Is it possible that we could have a copy of the presentation, please, as well? Because there's some stuff I just wanted to look at, the maps in particular and sites, so to speak. One of the things, I was going to come about the foresters, because I'm interested in the job creation around this and the fact that, this is the way that jobs are going. And I wondered whether we'd thought about a centre for excellence in the area, and whether creating a centre for excellence and a link with the university. I've just done a bit of a go. Cumbria comes up the top one as being the university that sort of does forestry, although there's a place that comes up in London. I don't know who it is that comes up at the side of it, but for me, is that a possibility? Because again, I know it was mentioned about apprenticeships, and I was going to say, well, what are we doing about apprenticeships in this field? Is there an opportunity with, we keep hearing about a levelling up fund? Is there an opportunity here with the level up fund and things that we could possibly do around that? Because, as I say, I think these are the jobs for tomorrow. And then that links in with works around what are we doing with the local schools to get youngsters involved, but also interested in this type of job, at the end of the day. And then the other one is when you have public access, you also get difficulties. And you never mentioned anything about off-road motorbikes and some of the issues that have surrounded that I know that we've suffered right across the county, and some of the damage that's been done by individuals in relation to the sites, and the cost and the time and the energy on having to restore and put back what damage they've done. And I wondered again, what your views are on that, and how we can be a bit more proactive relative to that.
Helen.
So in terms of working with the universities, we work closely with both the local universities, particularly with Brackenhurst through the Biodiversity Action Group. They have for the last few years hosted the annual Bag Forum. So we're working closely with their students. We currently have an intern funded via the Biodiversity Action Group working with us, who is from Nottingham Trent University, and that's the second one we've had. So she's on her placement year. So we're providing opportunities for work experience where we can, and providing opportunities for students to undertake volunteering activities on our sites. But yes, I think the idea of we already do have a centre of excellence in effect, because the work that the two universities are doing in these fields is quite outstanding. But how we capitalise on that is something I think we ought to look at. I'm not sure if you've got anything to add to that, Nick.
I was just going to say, so as a body of community forests, so the England's 12 community forests, this is an issue that we're acutely aware of and are discussing how we can bring more foresters through in a pipe, through the pipeline. I think the issue is that there's always a bit of a lag period where, we've suddenly everyone is doing woodland planting and there's a huge amount of demand for those sorts of skills, yet the training and the education hasn't quite caught up with it. So I think, it will catch up. But I think, providers need that assurance that, this isn't just a blip, the tree planting, this is something for the long term. And, there will be the jobs out there for these people who are put through the training and the education. So, yeah, it is an issue that we are aware of and are discussing. And, we, as a body of community forests, we don't all want to be in competition with each other for the same small pool of candidates. It's not good. So, yes, it is an issue we're looking at.
Okay.
I think in terms of your final point about some of the damage that is caused to sites, that's an entire presentation in its own right. We do work in partnership with other organisations who have similar issues and with the police to try and address some of these things. Education is the best way forward, but sometimes we just need to take preventative action. There are things we can do on site to help prevent off-road bikes getting on. But we do undertake a lot of reactive work to try and address the damage that they do.
Right. Okay, right, thank you. So I'm going to come to Councillor Gallen next, and I've got 4 other speakers, and then we're going to draw this to a close. I've got Councillor Barney, I've got Councillor Ogle, Councillor Smith, Councillor Wilmot, and time is getting on. So could we please keep the comments as brief as possible, please. So, Councillor Gowland.
Thank you. I think the idea of beavers is to slow the water, but I'm hoping that one day we'll have wolves in Nottinghamshire too. We know what great things they can do to the environment. Anyhow, being more serious, in terms of the shortage of foresters, I think you talked. I think the idea of a centre of excellence. Nottinghamshire doesn't train foresters. It sounds like it seems unfortunate, and it feels like something that we should be pushing on. We don't just want people volunteering; we want them to have jobs. But coming back to the volunteering, it seems very unfortunate that there aren't enough staff to support the volunteers, because I'm certain there'll be a lot of people keen to do this. It's a different pool of people to the people who've been supporting the communities over the last 2 years, and people are keen to get out and meet people with similar interests. You talked about data gaps of invertebrates. I appreciate it's an expert job and it needs professionals supporting it, but it is something the volunteers could help with. So I hope that we can find a way to support the council to support the volunteers or bring in the volunteers. I'm certain there'll be a lot of people keen to help. Would it be possible, just quickly, for us to have access to the biodiversity opportunity mapping, notified road verges and community forest maps for our areas, please, as district councillors, divisional councillors?
Maps?
Yes, we can supply. So all the biodiversity opportunity mapping is online on the NOTSBAG website, so we can provide you a link to that. And yes, we can certainly look at providing other mapping resources.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Barney.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I have 3 quick points that I'd like to make. The first, I welcomed Councillor Hollis's comments about biodiversity and carbon mitigation and getting the balance right between those 2 aspects. And I was delighted to hear you raise peatlands. I was going to ask a question, like the list you had up there of all the tree planting sites earmarked in Nottinghamshire. Do we have an assurance that they are not on peatlands? Obviously, historically, a lot of good work has been done over decades with tree planting, and a lot of it perversely having negative effects in the long term. So with regard to peatlands, none of the sites that we have are peatlands that you have earmarked. Fantastic. Second point I wanted to make was also a comment made by Councillor Hollis. I'd just like to pick him up on just slightly from my own experience, lifetime working in ecology and with groups like National Trust, the Countryside Council for Wales and the IUCN, and also, dare I say, the evil developers and property developers. And my experience of private consultant ecologists is not as Councillor Hollis described, and just in their absence, I'd like to defend them. I would say they're the most born individuals on the face of this earth. They all, in my experience personally of dealing with them, go into this industry with a heart for doing the right thing. And we find it extremely difficult that often their reports are not acted upon. So just wanted to defend them for a second. And finally, the beginning of your report, Heather, which was excellent, you mentioned the loss of green space to housing developments since 1990, and there was a slight sigh on the back benches here. We were astonished at the degree to which that has happened, but we're also aware right now, in all of our patches, there's a huge amount of property development going on. And I sense that we have a little bit of maybe just from the way your work was presented, that once a site is being developed, that it's lost in terms of its biodiversity gain. And I think that's something that I would strongly encourage this committee, and I take a point to the chairman, in terms of future planning applications. There's so much we can do to have good biodiversity on housing development sites. In Eastleigh, we've had a huge amount of building. That's my ward. One of the developments on that site, the developer has mandated for gaps in fencing for hedgehog tracks. They've insisted on bird boxes on every property, on every house that's being built, and they've put in tracks for wildlife and biodiversity tracks across the site. There's a lot that can be done, and I think that's something that, as the Environment Committee, with our hat on in that portfolio, we ought to take forward. Thank you.
Good. Thank you very much. Councillor Ogle.
Thank you, Chairman. I too welcome what's been presented today. I understand that the beavers can help with flooding with the hydrology and keeping the water back, but I went on YouTube to have a look because there's a lot of beavers in the United States and Canada apparently, and I think they were blowing dams up because some of them can be 12 foot high, and they were bringing high max in to where the dams were in the wrong place, obviously. And of course, they're not just moving soil or anything. These are massive trees they've felled because they're really good engineers, these beavers. But anyway, so I just thought I'd mention that because it's like, be careful what you wish for. The biodiversity, yes, I noticed there's a lot of habitats and the natural nature of much of the land in Nottinghamshire is forest, either light land or heavy land. And the natural inclination of a lot of this land is to return to scrub before it goes to forest. So I know you're going to have your work cut out on your grassland stabilisation, and you're going to have to be very careful. You're going to have to remove some of the production of that grassland to keep the keep it stabilised. So I just thought I'd congratulate you on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chairman. And just to echo what Councillor Adams and other councillors said, the loss of nearly 60,000 hectares is extremely saddening, and we must work to restore this. But the work that you, Heather, and the team of volunteers are doing is absolutely extraordinary and fantastic. I was blown away by what you showed there. So just want to say a massive thank you to the people on the ground there that are doing that. But Heather, you also said that there's more we need to do, and I just wondered what partnership work we were doing at the conservation team do with other teams in the council, like the asset management team or local district councillors, to highlight potential vacant development sites and also parks, opportunities on our parks. Two examples, one in my division of Newark East, we've got Beacon Hill Road, and there's a side bit there that is just wasteland attracting antisocial behaviour. I'm working with the asset management team to try and develop that, and keen to work with you as well. But highlighting that, there's also, I'm a district councillor in Gedling, and there's a site there owned by the county council which is designated for development, and I understand the rules around why that has to be. But I was on site there the other day. It's 2 years away from development. I think it's roughly 10% of each development site has to be dedicated to environmental improvements. Well, why, as a councillor, we're waiting 2 years to do that? We could do 10% now ahead of the development. So I just wondered what we can do there. And some of those projects could be at little cost. We could reap the cost back through Section 106, or as I say, develop the 10% now and not wait 2 years. Or in the Newark East bit, I'm prepared to pay out my divisional fund to improve that space, open it up as a community orchard, etc. So just fantastic work what you're doing. You said there's more we can do. Just want to know what work we're doing with other departments. Thank you.
Heather, any Well, Nick, any response to that?
Yeah, so we've been going through a process with the property strategy team to identify sites owned by Nottinghamshire County Council which could be made available for tree planting. So we are almost through the end of that, and we have whittled down a very large number of sites to not very many sites at all at the end, unfortunately, because a lot of the land we own for a reason, for some other purpose, and a lot of it does have development potential. So we are looking at the sites which have the best potential for tree planting, but also the least impact in terms of loss of future income from selling the land for development or whatever it might be. We have been in touch with all the district councils about Trees for Climate to see whether they have tree planting opportunities which we could fund through Trees for Climate. So we are following up that with, as I say, with the district councils, and there are further conversations to be had there. We've also had conversations with Nottinghamshire Wildlife Trust on in a similar vein. So we are exploring those avenues. In terms of the 10% biodiversity net gain, so yes, so biodiversity net gain is going to mandate that all developments need to deliver a 10% increase in biodiversity, a 10% net gain. It remains to be seen exactly how that will pan out. We're in a slight period of uncertainty at the moment where it hasn't become mandatory yet, so we need to wait for the Environment Bill to be enacted, and then there's a 2-year transition periods, and there are, as Heather mentioned, issues about how we're going to resource, reviewing all these biodiversity net gain calculations, etc. But I agree that where we can, we should start doing it now, and we are, for example, have required a developer to do a net gain calculation on a quarry application site to demonstrate that they will be delivering more biodiversity than there was currently. So yeah, it's a big piece of work coming over the horizon, biodiversity net gain, no doubt.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Wilmot.
Thank you, Chair, for letting me having a word on this subject. And it's the presentation was splendid. Thank you very much. It's enlightened me a lot on what's going off as far as biodiversity is concerned. But what I'm concerned about, have you got any figures on the volunteering? Is volunteering rising, or is volunteering decreasing on all our sites? And also, if any work is scheduled specifically in my ward, which is Dub Park and the Ranges, I would like to know about it. And I'm sure many of the other members of their areas would like to know what's going off as far as the green spaces or the local wildlife sites, what's happening. I should also like to know if we have a volunteer group in my area. I'd love to get involved with them. I'm sure many of you would like to know what your volunteer groups are or whatever. And I would love to know. As far as partnership working is concerned, please get in touch with the Knox Ramblers Association. They are using our spaces, and they need to know what they can do, and this, that, and the other, and so forth. And also, the partnerships need to be worked on much more, especially with the RSPB and the Wildlife Trust. I know you work with them quite a bit, but I would like to know exactly what happens to these meetings, what's discussed and what comes off from it, because we all are interested in what's happening in our wildlife areas. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any information on the numbers?
We've had a difficult year in terms of recording volunteering for obvious reasons. But what we have seen anecdotally is a massive increase in use of our sites over the last 18 months and an increase in interest from people wanting to volunteer. So we've also been building volunteering through the Minor to Major Partnership. We've been working with other organisations who work with volunteers and trying to coordinate that. So in 2023, December 2023, when that partnership comes to an end, we will have created a body of volunteers who are working across organisations and across sites and developing skills. And what we need to be doing now is thinking about the legacy of that and how we maintain that going forward. In answer to your question about what's happening in your patch, I think we can probably ask colleagues to answer that for you and send you some information.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Barnfather, being you're the only one, because I had closed the list, but you're the only one who hasn't spoken, so very briefly, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I saw you wince when I indicated to speak. Thank you for the presentation. Outside of this meeting as well. Thank you for the presentation, Nick, for reminding us obviously of the work that's been, excellent work that's been done by the County Council, and particularly from my point of view, the planting in Bestwood, which we've been in touch about, Nick, anyway, which I'm obviously delighted about, as is my community. But before any of our listeners who may be listening to this committee head to the shelters because of this biodiversity Armageddon that we've been discussing this morning, I just want, we have a balance here. We have a growing population and we have to feed, clothe and house a growing population. I'm sure everyone sitting in this room here lives in a very nice home. There are a lot of people that are not in that fortunate situation, and we have a responsibility as an authority to encourage development, appropriate development, to be able to make sure that everybody is able to have the benefits of this modern society. So just some of the statistics that you quoted there, and just some clarity, I'd be very grateful. I'm assuming they were national statistics rather than not statistics in your earlier slides. You referred to 50% of the natural environment, and then there was a reference to 69% agriculture. So is that 69% of the other 50% that is actually agriculture? And I suppose the important thing, so that our listeners don't think that we're concreting over this green and pleasant land of ours, I wonder if very succinctly you can just give me, out of our 100%, the amount that effectively is built environment, the amount that you would class as natural environment, and the amount that is agricultural environment, which I think would maybe put things in context, and picking up on the excellent point made by Councillor Barney, that biodiversity can exist across the country. It doesn't just exist in what we might see as natural habitat woodland. Thank you.
Yeah, Heather.
So the figures that I quoted right at the outset were mostly from the Environmental Audit Committee's report that was published in June. It makes for quite sobering reading. The 69% of land under agriculture is an England figure. I don't have figures off the top of my head for how much is actually developed at the moment. I don't think I found those figures in there. And the losses of biodiversity that I was quoting are almost entirely England figures. So they are national. And then I took that down to Nottinghamshire context for you, just to give a bit of context for us. The 50% loss of biodiversity, this was evidence that was presented to the committee by the Natural History Museum, who have been doing some work on a biodiversity intactness index. Their proposed safe level for loss of biodiversity is 90%. In the UK, we're just over 50% we've got left nationally. So I think the quote that came from the chair of the Natural History Museum's research team was that we are world leaders in environmental degradation, but this has been going on for centuries, and it's tied to things like industrial revolution. So the figures are quite stark, but I think there are things we are doing and can do that can help to address that, alongside the development that you obviously have highlighted we need.
Okay, thank you. I think Mr. Smith might have a helpful suggestion.
Just ever so briefly, members, perhaps we could compile for you a little compendium of some of the facts and figures and stats and maps which are included in the presentation and which colleagues have referred to, just so that you've got access to that as a bit of a ready reckoner, because there's a wealth of information you might find helpful.
Great. Yep. Thanks for that. Right. So we've got the two recommendations which have been moved and seconded. All those in favour, please. That's unanimous. Thank you. sorry, that was very interesting, and thank you very much for that. Please continue with the good work. Members, obviously, that did take a long time, but it was extremely interesting. But could we try and be as focused as we can on the rest of the agenda as time is getting on? But thank you very much indeed. Right, so item 5. Sorry, I flipped over too many pages. Item 5, the Highways Review Update. I think we're down to Derek Higdon, are we? Mr. Higdon?
Thank you, Chairman. Purpose of this report, members, is just to update the committee on progress with the Highways Services Review. Obviously, many members of the committee are part of the review panel listed at paragraph 2. Provide a bit of an update on the Local Government Association peer review planned for later this month, and also to recommend that all councillors are invited to an open day at Bilsthorpe Depot to gain a fuller understanding of operational highways activities prior to the wider consideration of recommendations coming out of the review panel's work being considered by committee or committees. The body of the report really just provides members with an update on progress thus far and on the areas that we've looked at as part of the initial work of the review panel. The panel has met twice. The second meeting in particular was a kind of day-long meeting. We talk about that in paragraph 6, where members of the panel had some kind of face-to-face demonstrations of a range of highways repair and maintenance techniques, which I think members found really useful and interesting. Hence, the recommendation that we perhaps extend that invitation to all other members as well, to give you all a real insight into the way that highways teams go about their day-to-day business. The third meeting of the panel is this Friday, and at that meeting the panel will start to consider potential recommendations for how we might address some of the issues that we've identified around potholes and patching techniques and approaches with a view to improving outcomes for all of our residents across the county and all of our road users. There are further dates set out in the report as well, taking us into October. And as we talk about in paragraph 8, as part of the review, we've asked the Local Government Association to undertake a targeted highways peer review, and that will take place during the week beginning the 20th of September, probably from the Tuesday to the Thursday of that week, and that will comprise of elected members and senior officers from other local authorities to come in, meet our various members, stakeholders, staff and partners to consider where we are in terms of highway maintenance and some other issues related to highways management, relating to the terms of reference that are in the attached appendix to this report, before coming up with some recommendations that will be shared with the council and of course shared with committee as well. Overall, the review process is well underway. We're getting to the point where members have started to think about ways forward on a range of issues, and that process will continue over the coming weeks. It's also worth mentioning that the panel has also now met with colleagues from other local authorities, senior officers and members. The panel met with colleagues from Hertfordshire last week, and there are further kind of meetings lined up with colleagues from Staffordshire, Derbyshire, and I think, Adrian, one other, or is that all three? The Isle of Wight, and the Isle of Wight, yes, to find out how other local authorities are dealing with the similar issues in their neck of the woods, to see what learning there might be from their experiences and their activities. But overall, the recommendation of the report is that members consider it and that approval is given to a members' open day at Bilsthorpe Depot in advance of the final recommendations from the review panel coming to the committee. Happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. So I'll move the recommendations that we accept the update provided in the report, and that we approve the holding of the members' open day at Billsthorpe Depot.
I'll second, Chairman, and support the recommendations.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Hollis.
Thank you. In paragraph 3 of the agenda, it states that a call for evidence has gone out to all county councillors. I note this indeed has gone out with a deadline on the 14th of September. This has caused frustration amongst the independent, as we note County Council have reduced the amount of maintenance schemes and integrated transport schemes that councillors can suggest from 5 down to 3. It's frustrating that at a time when the County Council is saying that they are seriously listening to the suggestions of councillors, at the first opportunity you've reduced our ability to make them. In the last administration, Mr. Chairman, there was frustration from members that we went to the trouble of putting suggestions in, only to have them ignored. I can understand that members were annoyed. Over the summer, my team have analysed the suggestions made by our councillors. It worked out that less than 5% of these were taken up. Begging the question, what's the point? Of this 5%, all the suggestions were made anyway through the course of the year. My point is, Mr. Chairman, our members are in touch with our district managers about highways complaints on an almost daily basis. We are using the MyNots app on an almost daily basis as well. We are making our suggestions all year round. I'm sure all the members are the same. My question is, what is the process for taking suggestions from councillors, to investigating it, to implementing it? How is a suggestion made through this process different from any other complaints made by councillors on behalf of their constituents? So that's kind of the point as the group lead on this from my group, but also I do want to welcome the fact that the members were given the opportunity to visit Billsthorpe. Unfortunately, I was unavailable on that day, but Adrian's assured me that I'll be able to go separate to the panel as well to do that. So I'll be looking forward to that. But yeah, so they're the kind of questions I assume directed to Mr. Hickton, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Well, the last bit, that's what partly what the open day is for. So that covers that one. The call for evidence is different to the schemes. The call for evidence was for you to make whatever observations and comments you wish to make. It's not restricted to any number of requests or anything. Call for evidence is a call for evidence, feeding into the highways review, quite separate from the ongoing projects that you're feeding into your district managers. Mr. Higton.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, the report references, Councillor Hollis, a message that's gone out in Councillor Clark's name, seeking the views of elected members on issues related to highways maintenance and management. That's distinct from our regular members' request arrangement, which has also been communicated to members recently, which is around where we seek the recommendations and requests from members around issues or items for inclusion in future highways works programmes. Which I think is the kind of core point that I understood that you were making. So I'll just ask Gary to step in and just talk us through the kind of process for consideration around members' requests.
Thanks, Derek. Just in terms of requests that you send to the district manager throughout the year, they will get flagged in VIA's asset management team, so they'll be aware that a member has raised it, and when VIA are looking at which schemes go forward, they take into account the fact that that's been raised by a councillor as part of the councillor's activity. What we're asking for in the member requests email that goes out annually is for you to, in your estimation, just list out your top priorities for those 3, or in previous years it has been 5. And I think it's probably a question for the panel, perhaps, to explore that process and see whether that process is going to continue, and the numbers and how councillors input into the programmes. But the actual decision-making process is quite complicated in terms of what you've put forward, depending on what it is. So on the ITM programme, for instance, there's a whole range of things that you could have put forward. And depending on the current policy and criteria against those schemes that are in previous committee reports, if it's a zebra crossing or if it's a roundabout improvement, they'll be considered against those criteria. And then if they make sense, be put forward into the programme. On the structural maintenance side, again, it's because of the backlog of repairs, we can't always accede to all the member requests, but we do try and balance it out across the members so that members get at least one scheme in their area. But again, that's another topic we could perhaps have a look at in the panel.
Thank you. Councillor Wilmot.
Thank you, Chair. Can I welcome the holding of the members' open day at Bilsthorpe, and ask out the input of members will be taken into consideration. At previous meetings, it had been stated that this council allocate funding to boroughs and districts by lengths of roads and not usage of roads. Officers, prompted by members, have stated...
Sorry, Councillor Wilmot, can I just say that item has already been raised, and it is being considered by the Highways Review Panel, so that's already on the agenda and already being taken into account. So the question has been raised and it will be discussed in the Highways Review Panel.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I would advise, I mean, I feel like we have this kind of fracas at every meeting. I note that you don't jump in from any other group other than mine. I would reassert that we are asking to consider recommendations 1 and 2. Councillor Wilmot was very clearly talking about recommendation number 1, which is in paragraph number 9 in the context of the members' open day. So, Chairman, I would urge you to stop interrupting independent group members while they are making their orations to this committee. You have no right to do that. We are here as equals, and you've done that at every committee so far. And I'm trying to be constructive and nip it in the bud now as the group leader. Stop cutting Councillor Wilmot
Right,
short.
okay, thank you very much, Councillor Hollis. If you have a complaint to make, then please make a formal, Councillor Ogle. Councillor Ogle, if you have a formal complaint, please make it formally. Councillor Wilmot was referring to an issue that you've raised so far at every meeting of the Highways Panel, and it is going to be discussed, so there's no need to raise it today because it's already been discussed in the Highways Review. And if people are asking questions that that have already been talked about, then I will correct members as and when I see fit. Councillor Wilmot, would you like to continue with the rest of your comments?
Oh, thank you very much, Chair. It's very nice of you. Thank you. I mean, yet nobody's been able to provide any evidence of this guidance that I've been talking about, other than claims that it is true. Can I specifically ask that this guidance, whether it be in email form or a document from the Department of Transport? The net result of this, of course, is that roads like Hucknall, compared to other places like Newark and West Bridgford, is in a not a state that.
Sorry, Councillor Wilmot. Sorry, you're raising specific things that are not relevant to the Highways Review Panel, other than the fact they are being raised by the Review Panel and they will be discussed in the Review Panel meetings. So this isn't the platform to keep raising individual road issues which can be raised at any time with with your district managers and with officers.
Mr. Chairman, I must interject.
Mr. Chairman.
No, Mr. Chairman, you are completely out of line. Councillor Wilmot
Councillor
is
Hollis,
talking.
you are completely out of line.
Mr.
You
Chairman,
are interrupting me.
He is
and
talking
I will adjourn the meeting.
Adjourn the meeting then, because you aren't chairing it appropriately. I'd like you to seek legal guidance immediately about how you treat our group. Councillor Wilmot at no point talked about an individual group. He talked about the entirety of Hucknall. The entirety of Hucknall. Well, Councillor Ogle, with the greatest respect, you don't get interjected by the chairman at every single meeting. Mr. Chairman, you need to seek legal advice about how
Councillor
you
Hollis,
interject.
I will do whatever I want to do as
Well,
chair.
I
Will you be quiet
I
while
will
I'm
not
talking?
be quiet. I will not be
Right.
quiet.
The meeting is adjourned.
Nottinghamshire recycles. Veolia, working with Nottinghamshire County Council. In Nottinghamshire, we encourage everyone to reduce, reuse and recycle as much as possible, so we don't waste precious resources. Let's see what happens to all the recyclables you put in your recycling bin. When your borough or district collection crew collect the recyclables from your home, they either take them directly to the material recovery facility or via a local transfer station, where they are bulked into an articulated lorry which collects them, and they are taken to our materials recovery facility in Mansfield. First, it's weighed in on the weighbridge, so there's an accurate record of its tonnage. All the recyclable materials are then unloaded into the tipping hall, where they are loaded onto the conveyor belts into the pre-sort cabin. This is where larger items like cardboard boxes are picked out to make sure they don't cover up any other recyclables. The large cardboard boxes are still recycled. The next stop is the trommel, where the waste passes through different sized holes in its rotating drum to separate out containers from the paper. Paper goes straight down to the paper cabins. All the other recyclable items
Meeting's now reconvened. I'll come back to Councillor Wilmots. Can you conclude your comments, please?
Can I just say, Chairman, I'm a little bit perturbed that I've not been able to speak my words that have been put forward to say, and I do welcome the holding of the members' open day at Bilsthorpe, but I'd just like to remind you all that the Hucknall the roads in Hucknall are in a disgraceful state, and that well over £1 million was spent on Newark and West Wedgford, whether we like it or not. It's down in the books, but I would like you to consider looking at Hucknall in a more respectful place, that it should have its fair share of funding. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Guilfoyle.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to just thank you for the opportunity to be able to submit evidence towards the committee. My main question is about, because it is such a, when you look at the number of tasks that that's got to be done, some of those are large chunks, and I just wondered how that will be presented to us, because what I wouldn't want is for us to get a big thick document like that and actually not do justice to it when we get to it, and whether there is an opportunity for parts of that to come so that we can have a good discussion around some of the issues. Just for members who are going through it, I'm just wondering, I don't know how you're going to eventually present it all, that was all, and I'm just thinking, you know, if it's a tome, which it could be, because I say the amount of work that you've got to do, we could be here for a week discussing it, whereas I would sooner take it in bite-sized chunks that we could probably deal with. Just a suggestion, Chairman. And I would say that Bassetlaw has actually got most of the roads in the county.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't finalised how it'll be presented at the moment. I think that is something up for discussion, so I can't give you a definitive answer as to how it'll be presented, because that's still going to evolve as we go through our discussions, and we'll then have to decide how best to present back our recommendations to progress. So the honest answer is I can't give you a definite answer. Is there anything you want to add?
I mean, just to thank Councillor Guilfoyle for the suggestion about trying to find well, firstly for prompting us to think ahead that far about how we present the findings and the recommendations, but the idea of components is one that we can feed into the review panel when they meet. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Barney.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I had requested to speak before the break. I just wanted to make the point that, and I might be slightly wet behind the ears and maybe slightly naive as a new member, but I, for one, absolutely welcomed the request for members to submit information about the state of their roads, highways and pavements in their own ward. And in good faith and with good intent, I have been taking that very seriously and have been talking to those across my ward, along with Councillor Adair, to furnish you with the best information we can, fully accepting that all of our requests and wish lists might not be honoured in the final play of the day. But as I say, in good faith, I have been doing that, and I would encourage, despite the political slurring about that process, that all members across all parties continue to do that to ensure that we can achieve the best quality outcomes for our residents across Nottinghamshire. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Barnfather.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I have the privilege of being part of a presentation yesterday by VIA, the Managing Director, Mr. Coots, who's with us today, and of course the VIA Chairman, Mr. Farnell. Unfortunately, because of time constraints, we didn't get that full presentation yesterday, and might I just suggest that the VIA be invited to give that presentation to members when they visit the Bilsthorpe depot on the open day as a precursor to the site visit, because it does actually give the build-up, the history effectively of VIA and how we've reached the point that we are now, and hopefully Mr. Coots would find that something that he would be happy to do.
I would say that a visit as an open day, the natural, I think, thing to do would be to have that as an introductory presentation anyway, because it gives then all the context of the things that members will go on to see afterwards. So yeah, to have that presentation, to a contextual presentation with the how it was all created, that's absolutely I think the right thing to do. Okay, right. So we've got the 2 recommendations which have been moved and seconded. All those in favour, please. That's unanimous. Thank you very much indeed. Now on to item 6, which is responses to planning consultations. Mrs. Gill.
Thank you, Chairman. The purpose of this report is to bring to members a updated protocol for the County Council's responses on strategic planning consultations that we receive from the district councils, from other government departments, or county council such as Leicestershire, Derbyshire, Lincolnshire. And this protocol, as I said, relates to planning consultations. It does not cover the ways that we respond as Highways Authority, nor in terms of flood risk. It's purely on strategic planning comments and how we coordinate those the collection of comments from colleagues across the authority, and how we bring those comments to members' attention. And if we are able to, through appropriate timescales, we will bring things to this committee, but timescales for responding don't always work like that. So we have a protocol where we have discussions with local members and the chair and vice chair. And also in order to ensure that the work of the teams across the authority is not bogged down with lots of very small planning applications, we do set thresholds. So we're commenting on the larger house building schemes, etc., back to the districts. So we have had a protocol for a number of years. We're proposing to refresh it, and we're bringing the refreshed protocol to your attention. But this, I will stress, is the way the County Council responds on the districts and others, their planning consultations. It is only part of the work of the department. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that. I might just ask Mr. Smith just to clarify. So my understanding is that this relates to the strategic planning consultation. There have been comments about getting involved in consultations on other aspects such as highways and flooding, etc. But in fact, if we refer to paragraph 3, the second sentence does state the comments on the Council on planning proposals as Highway Authority and Lead Flood Authority are made separately. So I just wanted to clarify that this is basically about a rebadging under this committee rather than the badges of the previous committees to bring it into line. So could you just clarify, is that understanding correct, Mr. Smith?
Indeed, Mr. Chairman, that's a full and accurate understanding. This is a bit of tidying up to reflect the changes we made to the committee system. I should stress, if members have, and we know we've already had engagement with some comments about the way the County Council has engaged or responded to, for example, Highways comments on planning, we gladly hear them outside the meeting. I would suggest that's a topic in and of its own, and it's something that with Matt Neal and Sally we gladly discuss with you outside committee, but perhaps today we can focus just on the updating of this protocol, which, as we say, is largely unchanged, other than to reflect that there is now a Transport and Environment Committee and not a Communities in Place one, as was under the previous administration.
So if I move the recommendation as set out on the top of page 19, that the committee approves the protocol, do I have a seconder, please? Thank you. So any comments? Councillor Barnfather, then Councillor Hollis.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Smith, for the clarification, although I'm not sure I'm clarified. So this is the Transport and Environment Committee, but we aren't actually talking about responses to Highways consultations, which seems slightly a contradiction in terms. We're talking about responses to what? If we're taking flood out and we're taking highways out, what exactly is it that we are responding to? Because they are the primary issues around most planning applications that would come to us from districts. And if we're taking those two out at this meeting of the Transport and Environment Committee, where do we raise it? Because actually the point I want to make is about highway consultations. And this used to be the Transport and Highways Committee, is still the Transport brackets Highways Committee and Environment Committee. So I'm a bit lost.
Mrs. Gill, would you like to just clarify?
Yeah.
Just in asking you to clarify, also at the top of the appendix and the yellow pages, it does say in the brackets, other than highway and lead flood authority. So could you just answer Councillor Barnfather's question?
This protocol relates to our strategic planning role. So when the district councils consult us on their emerging local plans, or if say Lincolnshire or Leicestershire commented on their asked us to comment on their emerging minerals and waste plans. So this is how we coordinate the strategic comments, and the comments that are covered by this protocol are again strategic planning consultations. So whilst we might be dealing with a housing development for say 500 houses, our comments, the strategic comments we're putting back are: do we need a new school? Do we need a new classrooms? So it's at that level. Other colleagues respond on highway our issues as the Highways Authority on planning applications from very small to very large. These are very much the strategic planning comments. They're not the very detailed ones. So we only deal with the larger developments. So it's: do we need a new school? Do we need a new library? Etc. So we keep it large scale. But those detailed conversations do go on in terms of planning applications. And as Mr. Smith said, that is a conversation we perhaps will have with yourselves outside of this meeting. But this is very much the strategic planning comments. So if you think of, it's very much local plans and above, and that's that scale of development. That's quite a lot of the stuff it deals with.
Councillor Barnfather.
So if I may just come back, Chair, I thank you. I thank you for the clarification from Mrs. Gill, and I think I understand now where she's coming from. I suppose the second part of my question was, though, if we can't discuss highways consultations at the Transport, Highways and Environment Committee, where can we discuss it rather than having a separate conversation outside of here with officers?
I think the answer to that is that let's raise it as a separate debate, and let's get have it as a separate conversation after we've dealt with this one.
Sorry, might I raise it then under the work programme, Chairman? Is that, I think, the last item on the agenda?
Feel free. Right, Councillor Hollis.
Thank you, Chair. I'm glad Councillor Barnfather asked that, because I was left equally confused, particularly bearing in mind the actual appendix then goes on to talk about dwellings and things. And I remember a very detailed conversation under the chairmanship of Councillor Cotty about these very protocols, because the County Council, I think Mr. Gill had come with a proposal, I think, to up some of these numbers, and that it was one of the few recommendations I've ever seen changed, I think, in a committee, where we lowered the numbers to the 200 figure, which is, of course, the figure that then triggers councillors' involvement, increased officers, committee involvement, etc. And I think, like Councillor Barnfather, I had a lot of questions about how we respond to some of this protocol. But in the context of the discussion, I'll try and keep focused on what the local plan, which is, and I've got an interesting something I wanted to raise, which kind of bridges both strategic local plans and an individual local plan. So individual planning application. So Lane site, 320 houses in Mansfield, Ashfield border. It just sits just in Ashfield. Ashfield Council rejected the planning application from Lovell Homes, and it was largely based on the County Council's recommendation for a number of
county council issues, highways included, strategic bus routes, etc. Up to that point, the county council had kept us as local members, particularly the local divisional member and Councillor Smith, updated. It then came to a planning inspector meeting in 2019 where Councillor Smith learnt from Lovell Homes that the county council had withdrawn all objections, and of course that went against the very protocol we're looking at. And what I kind of want to get across to members and hopefully officers as well is that this is a protocol worth supporting, and we will be supporting it because it sets out very clearly when members will be consulted, how the council will act, and all the responsibilities that are included. I want to urge the importance of members being included or at least informed of some of these decisions based on the protocol we're looking at. That subsequent application, the inspector overturned Ashfield Council's decision approving these 320 homes, largely because Lovell Homes made a real big fact out of the county council withdrawing their objections last minute. The local member, Councillor Smith, wasn't able to prepare for that. Most of her conversational topics to do with the inspector were based on the county council's objections, which were last minute withdrawn. So my only urge in this is that we do stick to the protocol, and it is a good progress. I really support some of those numbers. I mean, we had, like I say, detailed discussions about where we set the number of dwellings and when it triggers certain actions. So really, I just wanted to put across some of the problems when the protocol isn't followed, and I'd hope that we can learn from some of those mistakes going forward, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Yes, I'm sure that other examples could be identified as well. But Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chairman. And I don't want to dwell on this, but I am still confused, Mrs. Gill. So if you could just provide me some further clarification. Totally echo what Councillor Barnfather says. Point 1 says that this report is seeking endorsement from the councillors to update protocol on councillor involvement and approval of comments issued on behalf of the county council on bullet point 1 is planning applications. Now, planning applications will include highway comments, and in my short time as a county councillor, I've been contacting the highways team to ensure we do comment on applications in my division, because if we don't, we're opening up, we're disarming what district councillors can comment on when those applications come to pass. So if you are not, I'm not happy to endorse this report if point 1 stands on that bullet point, because you're asking us to endorse the protocol about point 1 planning applications, but then you're saying in point 3 that the comments on the council's proposals for highways are a different matter, but you can't have planning application comments from this council without commenting on highways. So I'm still very confused.
Councillor Smith, sorry, I think it was presented as consultation on planning applications as in a strategic context, and it does make mention of that in paragraph 3, and we have already talked about taking this forward and having a separate conversation about it. So
no, I'm quite
happy that we are talking about the strategic side of it. I'll just bring Mrs. Gill back again.
If I can just reassure you, Councillor Smith, when we respond to planning consultations on the strategic planning matter, and in paragraph 2 we set out the whole raft of things that we do comment on, there will also be a separate letter on highways issues, and very often there's a separate letter on flooding issues. So just because those 2 issues aren't mentioned in this consultation, please rest assured they're not forgotten. There is correspondence on those, but this relates to the strategic planning consultation, and as Mr. Smith and Councillor Clark said at the start, over time we have reported the strategic planning issues that we get involved in to various committees, and our current iteration of the committee is the Transport Environment Committee. It's been over the years I've worked for the County Council, we've had a number of committees with a number of different names, so we're just making sure we have the right name for the right committee.
Yeah, okay, all right, thanks for that clarification. So let's now go, so the recommendation has been moved and seconded, so all those in favour of the recommendation, please. Correct.
Yes.
That's what we've just been debating. The fact that the highways are separate. So is that unanimous, or is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9? Okay, thank you. Item 7, the performance report. Mr. Higdon.
Thank you, Chairman. So to be brief, this report provides the committee with an update of performance with the services that fall within the remit of the Transport and Environment Committee for the first quarter of this year, April to June, and it also provides a similar financial overview as well. The detail is supplied in the attached appendices to the report, and either myself or other colleagues will be happy to take any questions that members have.
Okay, thank you for that. So I'll move the recommendation on page 26. Seconder, Councillor Ogle. Councillor Gowland.
Just a quick point. Under the waste services, it gives the amount sent to recycling, and then it gives the amount diverted from landfill. I think it would be helpful or better, really, if it gave the amount that went to a landfill and then the amount that went presumably to incineration, and ideally split by the amount that goes to incineration for heat recycling. Though I realise that's getting to a level of detail, but I think it would be, frankly, more honest to say the amount that goes to incineration and the amount that goes to landfill, because I guess that's the difference between those numbers. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, yes, there is that. You immediately want to ask the question, what happened to the other 50% or 54%? Mr. Higdon.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Councillor Gallen. We can look at how we present that information for future reports. We're taking a broader look at how we present this kind of information to make it as digestible as possible for members. And as part of our environment strategy development work as well, we'll be looking at how we present a variety of cuts of different kind of waste and environment related information. So it's something that we'll seek to work through.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Councillor Wilmot.
Thank you very much, Chairman, for allowing me to speak on this issue. In agenda item 5, it talked about the importance of communications, and I'm fully in agreement with that. Yet in paragraph 7 of this report, it talks about delivering services through external parties. Yet the example it gives is via East Midlands, that points out that this is wholly owned by Nottinghamshire County Council. I just wondered, why is VIA described as an external partner when it clearly is not? With regard to the overspends contained in the report, in waste outlined in paragraph 15 and conservation outlined in paragraph 16, what attempts have been made to claw this money back from the £20 million plus sat in the bank via the unring-fenced COVID reserves? As on both occasions, it specifically mentions that the overspend was due to COVID. Would this not be financially prudent? Thank you, Chairman.
Mr. Higdon, any response?
Thank you, Councillor Wilmot, for that question. So as far as Beaver is concerned, as an organisation, as a company, registered at Companies House, it is external to the County Council. It is not a part of the County Council establishment, whilst it is owned and therefore controlled by the County Council. So it will be classed as an external partner, hence the description in the report. As far as service-related overspends are concerned, and the link then with the COVID monies that we draw down from government, what we're describing here is our current in-year position, and you'll see from the relevant appendix at the report that overall the services associated with this committee are marginally underspent overall. So what we tend to do corporately at the end of each year, and I think that's the plan this year, though I should stress that I'm not an accountant, but the plan at the end of the year is effectively to settle up. So in those areas of the council's budget where there is significant overspend and it is COVID related, then that funding will be released to cover off those overspends. So what we're presenting to you at the moment is the current in-year position, that process of settling up, straightening up the accounts happens later in the year.
Thank you. Right, okay, so it has been moved and seconded. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you. Item 8, the Active Travel Fund, Tranche 3, bids going for funding, and we've got Sean Parks with us. Would you like to introduce the report, please?
Thank you, Chairman. Just a bit of background. In June, the DfT announced the latest round of bids for the Active Travel Fund, as well as inviting the leaders of the highway authorities outside of London to submit an expression of interest in developing a mini Holland scheme, should they wish to do so. Unfortunately, the timing of Transport Environment Committee and also the work involved in terms of the development of these bids meant that it wasn't possible to seek committee approval prior to their submission. We therefore discussed the proposals with the chairman and the vice chairman before they were submitted, and they were submitted subject to committee approval, which we're now seeking. So the purpose of this report is therefore to seek committee approval for the County Council's Active Travel Fund Tranche 3 bid, its expression of interest in undertaking feasibility and development work on a potential mini Holland scheme in Stapleford, and the development and delivery of these programmes should DfT allocate funding towards them. As committee may be aware, in partnership with the other 3 D2N2 highway authorities, the council has also developed a D2A N2 area-wide local cycling and walking infrastructure plan, LCWIP for short. The outputs from this development work is being used to identify strategic cycle networks, and the locations of those schemes and the priorities within that are included in those 2 bids, which is a DfT requirement for those bids as well. The council has secured some additional revenue funding to further develop the LCWIP. And so this report is also seeking approval for this development work, which will include undertaking joint consultation with the other D2N2 highway authorities on the LCWIP. I think this is key because it will give both members and the public opportunity to comment on the LCWIP in detail and how those networks have been prioritised, and also starting feasibility and design work on the council's priority schemes, so that the council's in a better position going further forward to secure future funding should for their delivery should it become available. I'm happy to take questions. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you for that. So recommendations, bottom of page 36 and at the top of page 37. There's 1, 2 and 3, which I will move. Do I have a seconder, please? Councillor Ogle. And just to echo the comments that have already been made, that the bid had to go in, and so the table showing the priorities 1, 2, 3 and 4 of the actual bid, and then the reserve items priorities 5 and 6, depending on the amount of money we can actually get out of them, basically. Councillor Gowland.
I don't know the history to this, and I really don't want to attack the officers because I don't understand how we got here. But I'm looking at this, £3 million for the River Trent path, right? I would run it. I cycle on there. Everybody in West Midlands cycles on there who needs to. I see this as irrelevant, unambitious, disappointing. These are the words that come to my mind. I'd rather that £3 million was taken to Sutton and used to do something useful. I'd like to know what that money is going to be used for, and why there weren't more fundamental change that could have been used, fundamental places that could have been used to make more fundamental shifts that actually got people cycling who aren't already cycling. That's not a transformative use of money at all. And it's a lot of money. I'd be interested to know what that money is going to be used for. Thank you.
Sean.
The actual cost of that scheme isn't £3 million. It's £600,000. That is yeah, £3 million would be a tremendous amount. I think the key thing what we have to remember is that I agree that there could be other schemes across the whole of the county, and that's one of the reasons why we need to develop a pool of schemes for this. that one of the criteria is that schemes have to be deliverable during 22-23, which limits an awful lot of what we can do, in all honesty. But similarly, they have to be deliverable to certain standards. All of this is set out in the report, obviously. There's a whole criteria of how they were identified, and I think it'd probably be easier if we just came and had a detailed conversation with you how we do that. I think that will come out in terms of the consultation we're going to do as part of the LC whip. But in the meantime, we're happy to come and just have a chat with you to go through it all. It'll probably be easier. Obviously, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Guilford.
Yeah, sorry, just to probably reiterate what I said at the previous committee. I mean, looking at the mini Holland scheme and cycling in general, I'm still concerned that we're not getting to grip with new developments. You know, if you're talking about a mini Holland scheme, you know, I'd like to see a new development that's actually completely designed with cycleways, charging for vehicles, everything that you could think of. That people, when they moved in there, they understood what was coming. I think it's harder when you're trying to reintroduce it into existing infrastructure, and that's somewhere where the cost is coming. You know, why at the moment the county council is trying to sort of deal with it on existing roads, which are sometimes not the best and don't suit. And I think that there is a large cost to that. Whereas if we got it right at the development stage. If it was included within the plans, local plans, that cycleways, etc., were going to be put in, which they're not, and they're still being built, you know, it's absolutely ludicrous, because all that happens is, whoever sits here in another 20 odd years is going to be saying all those new estates, oh, we need to be putting cyclewells in there at a cost to the county council, where it should be the developer that's doing it. Now, I know that in what they're looking at is obviously, well, that could cost them 10 properties out of a development, you know, or 20 properties, which is loads of money. But actually, it would be far cheaper at that than us to go back in and retrofit, you know. So for me, I want to see that where we're going with new developments, how we can work with them, as well as doing some of this work on some of the link up, but how we are making sure that new developers do all this and sort of future-proof it, and so that the costs are that neither government, taxpayers, council taxpayers are having to pay for all this additional work to be done when it should have been done in the infrastructure. And I do get frustrated over it, because I'm seeing new properties being built and new housing estates being built around where I live, and there are nowhere for people to get on by, other than if they want to take the family out, you want to take your grandkids or whatever out on a bike, you've got to use the footpath. And then you're coming up against people going balmy because you're riding on the footpath. You know, so something's got to be done, and it's got to be done at that stage. And I think a mini Holland scheme around a new development, you know, that you could showcase would then, I think also, you know, you would get people who would probably specifically go and buy a property there, as opposed to elsewhere, because of the way that it's been designed. So I think we should be looking at all the local plans, or trying to get in at those local plan stages and saying to them, what are they doing? And our highway comments on new developments should be saying to developers, why aren't you putting cycle lanes in? And there should be no excuse for them not doing it. And yeah, I know I've said it before, but it's just, as I say, it's so frustrating.
Yeah, well, absolutely agree with you, Councillor Guilford, and I think a good majority of the members here are also members of district councils, and certainly I can say for myself, and I'm sure other members of district councils can say the same thing, that we've put forward arguments now on new developments to make sure that the very thing that you're suggesting is incorporated into master plans of new developments, and just got to make sure that those roads, or the land available for those roads, are wider to incorporate a cycle path or whatever. So I think it's incumbent upon us all to make sure that that master planning is taken into account, to make sure that we do.
Can you tell me one that's been done? Anyway,
well,
seriously, seriously do not know.
There are developments in my area which have yet to be built because they're still at planning application stage, where that has been incorporated. So, but they haven't been built yet because they're still at approval stage. So, I don't. Do you want to add anything? Sorry, Mrs. Gill.
I think the challenge for us all, whether we're working for the county council or councillors at district or county council level, is when anything turns up as a planning application, it's almost too late. We've got to make sure stuff is in the planning policy documents where we set out where the design briefs are set out. That's where we need to be saying to developers, we want to see cycle routes, because sadly, when anything comes as a planning application, it's almost too late. But we collectively, and it's not just me as the county council officer, it's yourselves, regardless of how many hats you're wearing, we've got to work right at the early stage. If a piece of land, someone's coming forward with some ideas of developing on that land, that's where we need to say, right, we want some cycle routes, we want this, we want that, and we need to set our stall out right from the start.
Is it within our strategic plan? Is that a policy within our strategic plan? Is that something we can put in as an amendment to our strategic plan? Bassett Law's currently going through the Planet Local Plan. I don't know if any other councils have or are or what.
Could I just suggest that perhaps that's a question that perhaps could you put to Mrs. Gill outside the meeting, because obviously this is about the active travel fund.
But yeah, fine.
Started a conversation earlier on today, so I think Glyn, we need to continue the conversation that we've had and work out what we can do and how we can do some stuff.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Councillor Hollis.
Thank you, Chair. And I think I want to focus a lot of my comments on the mini Holland part of the recommendations. But before I do, I wanted to pick up on Councillor Gowland's comments. I mean, I always knew I liked you, Councillor Gowland, you know, from day one. But what you say that brilliant. But no, but in seriousness, I can see why the Labour group have championed Councillor Gowland and put her as the main spokesman on this committee, because it's clear she brings a very different perspective, particularly with relation to pedestrians and whether it be pavements, cyclists, etc. Whereas I think rest of us are certainly guilty, certainly me, of looking at it from a very bus focused perspective, not just pedestrians, which of course is much part of the highway. And particularly when we hear comments from officers like, well, we have to do these projects because we need to spend the money. That doesn't seem like a great reason to do it. And maybe £3 million wasn't accurate, but £600,000 sounds an equally large amount of money. And I only can say that the district council, we've gone slightly out of our purview, I suppose, and been building a lot of paths and parks across estates. Like Councillor Guilfoyle says, we've gone back retrospectively and resurfaced pathways. Sometimes with the county council's permission, sometimes where it's on our own land, we can just get on with it. But we resurface most of them for 20 grand, and we can resurface some quite large pathways for just £20,000 because, of course, it's quite a cheap thing to do. So 600,000 sounds like a hell of a lot for a pathway. So I'd be intrigued to hear more about that. And Councillor Guilfoyle's comments, while we've heard him make a number of earlier opportunities previously, I welcome him making them again because it was certainly relevant to this discussion. And he makes a good point. I mean, particularly with regards to the cycle routes. I would invite Councillor Guilfoyle to go and look at Alfreton Road in Sutton-in-Ashfield, which is in Councillor Sir Josney's division, where quite literally the developers probably taken our so-called protocol and just tick the box because it's a cycleway that literally leads to absolute nowhere. It comes out of the estate and just ends. And it's bizarre to see. And I remember it coming in front of I was on the planning committee at the time, and we're all scratching our heads, but it quite clearly met the county council's objectives. And I think sometimes there has to be an element of common sense. And it almost takes me back to the analogy of the dole queue. You know, sometimes you need to use more than the common sense, more than the paperwork in front of you to assess something. You need that element of common sense. And I think a cycle path that leads to nowhere doesn't achieve anything but waste all of our time. So I'd hope things like that are looked into. So I certainly support the comments that were made by the Labour group. But with regards to the Mini Holland proposal, the independent groups had a chance to have a look at similar proposals across the country. And it's fair to say that these can cause loggerheads amongst politicians. For example, in Crawley, a Labour council, the leader of the council, I'll start again. In Crawley, a Labour council, the leader of the Conservatives argued that a similar scheme would create misery and traffic chaos. The Conservative MP for Crawley then refused to back the scheme. In Walton Forest in London, it was a similar story. Labour put in a bid, but the Conservative group leader Matt Davis said the plan would clearly disadvantage all road users, including bus passengers, and other than a small majority of residents who were cyclists. He accused Labour of being obsessed by The Guardian. I acknowledge, Mr. Chairman, that these discussions are an early stage, but could we have reassurance that there will be a full consultation with retailers and residents alike? Social mobility and therefore public transport is terrible in Nottinghamshire. Will these plans actually lead to residents being increasingly isolated within their communities? And they were certainly the concerns we had with regards to recommendation number 2.
Would you any comments?
Yeah, I would just state that effectively what we have committed to doing as part of our expression of interest is to do exactly as you requested, that we would do the consultation with the businesses, all of the social mobility groups, to make sure that any proposals are led by the community, not by the officers. It actually states that in the letter, because it's going to be those people who are affected by it, but also it is about real change, as Councillor Gowland said, transformational change, and so we need to make sure we get it right. So yeah, there is that, definitely that.
Okay, Chairman, if I may, I think it's just in the context of us. We aren't Holland. We've got a very different public transport, a very different culture to them, and I wouldn't want to see something kind of just dropped in. Certainly, pedestrianised zones and things alike, like what we propose here, work very well. You know, you've got loads of examples across the country, including in Hucknall. But when we start talking about wider changes to traffic, we need to look at it in the context of that our public transport is awful. And I'd hope it is kind of looked at it from all perspectives. I certainly support what you've said and I encourage you to do more consultation as much as possible.
Okay, thank you. Right, so the 3 recommendations have been moved and seconded. All those in favour, please. That's unanimous. Thank you. Item 9, electric vehicle charging infrastructure conference. Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Chairman. So just members, this report is consistent with the provisions in the Constitution that governs the operation of our service committees, in that where members attend paid for events that are subsidised by the County Council, there needs to be a committee resolution in order to support that. Chairman is proposing to attend an event on electrical vehicle charging infrastructure, as can be seen in the report, and thus we're seeking a committee resolution in support of that.
Councillor Adams.
Yeah, formally happy to move the recommendation as featured on
page 40.
Thank you, page 40.
Councillor Ogle.
I was formally second, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Guilfoyle.
Yeah, Chairman, I'm glad that Councillor Barnford is here today, actually, because it's just in relation to conferences. Many moons ago, we used to actually do 2-on-1 conferences, that because we realised that, you know, the education and the training and the learning runs right across, you know, the spectrum, and it helps all people on sides of the debate to have a better understanding. And clearly, you know, I looked at this and said, well, why is not a member of the opposition being allowed to go with a member of the majority group? And why that is not, I mean, it's happening on other conferences. If you look at the local government conference and the other conferences that we're doing, the leader and the deputy leader and the leader of the opposition, main leader of the opposition, are going to attend conferences. I just wondered why on these, because I'm sure that there are other members who are interested in this who would gain a lot from it, and the county council will gain in the longer run. That's all.
Well, that's above my pay grade, so I'm going to ask Councillor Barnfather to answer that technical question.
I don't think I've got a pay grade, Chairman. I hear what Councillor Guilfoyle says, and absolutely right. As long as I've been on this authority, meetings such as the County Councils Network or the Local Government Association, strategic meetings have always been attended by two members of the administration, usually, whether that's been a Labour administration historically or a Conservative administration or a coalition administration, and one member of the opposition plus at least one senior officer, because they are strategic meetings. Normal attendance at the type of meeting that we are discussing today has only ever, in my recollection, been attended by one individual member, and usually the chair of the relevant committee. That doesn't mean that there will not in the future be conferences which are of such a significance to this authority that representation could not be made, and I think that would have to be made on a case-by-case basis. There is no set policy for that. Attendance at all committees comes to the relevant committee for approval. It used to be, if you recall, in 2009 we had an administration committee that actually made a decision on all conference attendance, and in fairness, we did away with that because some of the meetings of that committee took 5 minutes, and members were travelling from all over the county for a 5-minute meeting, and we delegated that responsibility and authority to the relevant committee, as is the case here. As I say, I hear what Councillor Guilfoyle says, and I think it's too late now. This is a conference tomorrow. All I would suggest that in future, if there are such conferences where it is felt by members of the opposition that the attendance would be strategically beneficial to the council, then that conversation can be had, and as I say, each one judged on an individual basis.
Thank you. Councillor Hollis.
To be honest, my comments were exactly the same as Councillor Guilfoyle. I mean, I've sat on this authority for close to a decade now. I've never seen a committee report where, I mean, I'll happily be proven wrong, where members of the opposition are included. It's normally on the 2-to-1 basis. I'd be intrigued to know if we've actually paid for this thing before, bearing in mind it's already, as you say, tomorrow. Because we'd be interested to know if this committee says no to this report today, would the hotels get cancelled? And will we?
Can I just give you some information? It's actually Councillor Barnfather did actually mislead us, because it's not tomorrow. It's
I'm going to say it's certainly soon. Yeah,
it's next Tuesday, yeah. but also it's not paid for. It's a free.
But we're paying for a hotel accommodation.
Yeah, but nothing's been paid for.
My request in future would that we get a little bit more notice than this. I'm going to assume that this conference has been planned for some time, because, and I'd also like to see opposition members included. I appreciate we're the minority group, but it's certainly appropriate for the Labour group as the major opposition to be included in conferences, as we've always done. And bearing in mind, any experienced member looking at this will know that a conference bill is normally considerably higher than £400. Bearing in mind how cheap it is, it would have been a good opportunity to include maybe both opposition groups, but certainly the major opposition. And bearing in mind, this is going to be a big challenge facing the county council, installing these things. It's a big part of our strategic plan. It would have been nice to have a wider thing. So we we'll abstain today just because we don't agree with it. But I think it's great that, you know, we're finally looking at environmental issues.
Yeah, well, to be honest, I don't know when it was planned, but it was we were only aware of it at very short notice. So it was probably planned ages ago, but didn't see the publicity for it until short notice. Right, it's been moved and seconded. All those in favour? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 in favour. Against? Abstentions? And I'll abstain as well. 3. Right. Okay. Thank you very much. And the final item 10, work programme. Mr. Smith.
Well, I'm looking forward to hearing all the requests for additional items to be added to the work programme from members, of which I think Councillors Ogle and Bonfather are indicating.
Yes, Chairman. It was interesting, the natural environment and woodland creation, but I think it's important that we look further into these invasive species and what's being done to control them. I know the crayfish and Himalayan balsam was mentioned, but there's other invasive species, and also just have a look at the costs and the budget and get more information on that. So I'd suggest we have a report in the future as a first step on this particular path.
Okay, thanks. So if we put that request in, put that request onto the list. Councillor Barnfather.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I feel a bit cheeky actually as a substitute member asking for an item to be put on a work programme that I may not be a substitute on this committee for. But it is something that I have discussed with colleagues, and I think Mrs Gill will be aware of my interest in this because I did raise it as the former chair of the Planning and then Licensing Committee. But when this council or this authority as a statutory consultee receives a notification of developments under the auspices of the district council as the local planning authority, we respond as we are obliged to do, and invariably our response is no comment. Sometimes it's no objection, but invariably, in my experience as a 10-year member of a district council planning committee, it is no comment. So when I then addressed the local district planning committee with objections based on my local knowledge of the area and the potential problems that would be caused by highway safety issues by a particular development, all I get told is, well, the Highways Authority have said basically they've got no objections, and they've raised no objections. They've said no comment. Now that's because I think most of these, and there will be hundreds, thousands of them, are desktop exercises conducted by officers, and I understand that they will not have that local knowledge that members do or the local community do. So even if we don't have the local knowledge, as the local ward member or divisional member in this case here, we are contacted by our residents when a planning application goes forward, but we'd have no say in any of that process. So effectively, it's a done deal. It's a fait accompli when it appears before a district council planning committee, once the Highways Authority, us, have said no objection or no comments. So I would welcome, I raised this at the planning committee, and it was not really a planning committee issue, but Mrs Gill knows that I have a bee in my bonnet about it, and we did actually get the I think manager or the head of the planning policy highways team to come and address the planning committee, but it's actually a highways issue rather than a planning issue for the county council as a planning authority, because we consider our own applications and not district applications. So I would urge perhaps this committee, if anybody shares my views, if not, please shout me down. If anybody shares my concerns, that perhaps something should come to this committee in how we as a highways authority deal with, address, take into account the views of local members when we respond to statutory consultations. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah. Thank you. I did refer in an earlier item to the fact that a good majority of us are dual hatters, district councillors as well. I certainly have encountered similar experiences as you've just outlined, and I agree with your comments, and I feel pretty confident that majority of district councillors would probably share your view as well. I don't know whether Mrs Gill wants to respond, or Mr Smith. Is it relevant to this?
Yeah, it's the same issue. I understand what you're saying, but we are entitled to write in as a county councillor, because I think the difficulty could come, and it does come sometimes, because I've been there, where I've contacted the local highways manager who will either put or not put comments in dependent upon the application. and there may be a disagreement between myself on what I perceive or what the public are telling me they perceive as highway problems, where the highways officer, from his professional point of view, will have a contrary argument to put and disagree. And I think that's one of the issues where, well, how do you resolve that? Because in reality, we can't instruct an officer to put comments that in his professional opinion, isn't it? He doesn't support, and that's quite right. But that does not stop members themselves from putting them in. But obviously, it doesn't have the same weight as what it would as an officer. But that is the only difficulty. But were they support? I mean, I've gone to officers and said, you've not commented on this, and I've got a concern about, and the officer said, Councillor Guilfoyle, on reflection, I agree with you, and it's something I could put in as in and support that, and they have done that. They've also done the other one. They've disagreed with it and said, no, I'm not putting that in, I don't agree with it. But, I think it is a difficulty on that particular issue.
Yeah. Mr. Smith.
So members, taking those points all together, I think there's an item to add to the work programme around reviewing the approach and the process for submitting Highway Authority comments in response to local planning matters. So we'll work up something and bring that back for your debate and consideration in due course. Thank you.
Does that preempt you wanted to speak? Is that okay? Thank you, Councillor Smith. Councillor Gowland. Sorry?
I want to bring up a different matter.
Fine.
Okay, thanks. I think there's not much on here about public transport. Not a lot of people have to use public transport because they can't afford a car or they can't drive a car for some reason. We've got the national bus strategy later, but I wonder if we could have an item on the recovery of public transport after the pandemic, because obviously it's pretty important, and we spend a lot of time talking about the environment, and getting people onto public transport is key to that as well.
Okay, if we can add that to the list of requests then. So, Councillor Guilfoyle.
And how we influence the local plan, but also how we, if we get our MP, because actually we're talking national strategy, and how we get them to put into position for something should be literally an issue that, look, you build cycle routes, etc.
We can have a look at what we can do.
Mr. Smith's just indicating, yes, we'll include that in the list of requests as well. Okay, so with those additions, can we formally approve the work programme? All in favour? That's unanimous. Lovely. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, members. Thank you, officers. That's the end of the meeting. Conclude the meeting. Stop the recording now, please. Thank you.
Nottinghamshire recycles. Veolia, working with Nottinghamshire County Council. In Nottinghamshire, we encourage everyone to reduce, reuse and recycle as much as possible, so we don't waste precious resources. Let's see what happens to all the recyclables you put in your recycling bin. When your borough or district collection crew collect the recyclables from your home, they either take them directly to the material recovery facility or via a local transfer station, where they are bulked into an articulated lorry which collects them, and they are taken to our materials recovery facility in Mansfield. First, it's weighed in on the weighbridge, so there's an accurate record of its tonnage. All the recyclable materials are then unloaded into the tipping hall, where they are loaded onto the conveyor belts into the pre-sort cabin. This is where larger items like cardboard boxes are picked out to make sure they don't cover up any other recyclables. The large cardboard boxes are still recycled. The next stop is the trommel, where the waste passes through different sized holes in its rotating drum to separate out containers from the paper. Paper goes straight down to the paper cabins. All the other recyclable items